This is not only a treat, but an honor, because Tom Blanton is someone I highly respect and profit from. He's the director since 1992 of the independent non-governmental National Security Archive, as I mentioned, at George Washington University. Imagine someone who has won an Emmy Award in 2004, a George Polk Award for journalism, 2 medals, one from Czechoslovakia and one from Romania for supplying documents and information. He's a member of the National Freedom of Information Act Hall of Fame, and he's won the Jean Mayer Global Citizenship Award as well. And he's produces about 1 ebook every week or something. Luckily, I'm on his list, and they come with documents, and it's extraordinary. And Sheila talked about the importance of sources. Well, these are sources about usually foreign policy, but about all kinds of things you can imagine. He can talk about that. He's written books, too, because he has so much time on his hands. The last superpower summits, Gorbachev, Reagan, and Bush conversations that ended the war, with the eminent Svetlana Savranskaya. They seem to be a team. I've never seen one of them.
We've been married for a while.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. I've never seen one.
It's a superpower condominium.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Masterpieces of History, The Peaceful End of the Cold War in Europe, 1989. Again, with the same Svetlana Savranskaya, and this time with my other friend, Vladislav Zubak. And I could go on and on, but why should we waste time and why shouldn't we listen? So Tom, go ahead, go for it.
I thought I would start with E.H. Carr. He's come up so many times already just today. And my favorite E.H. Carr story is how in the book, What is History?, he gestures down the hallway at the university to one of his colleagues who's the world's leading expert in Sumerian civilization. And Carr remarks, that guy has read every cuneiform tablet that still survives from Sumerian civilization. And what that means is he's mastered all the evidence and he's 99.9% ignorant of everything that ever happened in Sumer, right? We have the opposite problem. And I'll come back to that at the end, the digital challenge. But first I want to do 3 things. 1, tell you more about the National Security Archive and how you can use what we produce. 2nd, describe the archival schizophrenia in Washington today that will have an impact, I think, on all of your careers. 3rd, I'll end with this digital challenge, and then I'm going to try to keep it down to about 30 minutes so that you can ask questions, because my core message here is pay it forward. File your Freedom of Information requests. You will not get the answers in time for your dissertation, but you will for your 2nd book and for the next generation of scholars. And that's why we're doing this. It's a crusade to open sources. So the National Security Archive was invented in 1985 by a group of journalists and historians who in the previous 10 years had amassed stacks and stacks of primary sources. The Freedom of Information Act did not apply to foreign policy, national security, international affairs until the amendments of 1974, which were passed over the veto of President Ford. And for the first time, actually required courts and reviewers to look into these documents de novo. So in the following 10 years, the stacks of releases became so high that certain spouses said to their dearly beloved researchers, journalists, and historians, get those documents out of my kitchen. And they invented this National Security Archive to save their marriages. So we've been a family values place ever since. First, we were at Brookings Institution. Now we've been at George Washington University. We have filed, I think I just checked before flying here, our 777th Freedom of Information request last week. Not all successful, I should say, but it's like, I think Science Magazine once published a detailed schematic study of about 1,000 squirrels. And the squirrels did not remember where they actually put that acorn. But if there were enough squirrels digging enough holes and planting enough acorns, all the squirrels could live through the winter on what was there. And that's kind of my metaphor for the Freedom of Information Act.
Squirrels.
You got to plant. Well, think about the incredible gymnastics that squirrels can do. The gymnastics you've done in your own career. Just think about that. But what we do with these requests and the documents when they hit is create these ebooks. We're now approaching 900 ebooks on the National Security Archive main website. Just search National Security Archive, click on that. You'll see extraordinary. We're going to have some more this summer. In about 2 weeks, you'll see an update on the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What were the actual thinking, not only among the American leaders like Truman or General Groves, but also in the emperor's court in Japan with translated Japanese documents, and the reactions of Stalin, because as we now know, that was a key piece of this. The debate was always, oh, was it for scaring the Soviets, or was it for ending the war, or was it, and it's kind of an all of the above, all of the above answer, A, B, C, D, E, E, all of the above usually is a better shot. So watch for these ebooks, sign up on our website, and you can get, we don't sell your name, we don't sell your email, but you'll get an alert every time we publish some new documentation. So we have over 1 million pages published by ProQuest. We get no government funding whatsoever. We have private foundations, wonderful people like Deanna Arsenian, who you heard from in Carnegie, has funded so much of this great work over the years. And we have about 250 university libraries who subscribe through ProQuest to this massive curated digital National Security Archive. And that's been key to our success going forward. So our core motto, if you will, comes from the founder of the first historical society in the United States, which was the Massachusetts Historical Society. It was a guy named Jeremy Belknap. His name is on the Harvard University Press imprint, Belknap Press. Belknap said, there's nothing like having a good repository and keeping a good lookout, not waiting at home for things to fall into the lap, but prowling about like a wolf for the prey, or like Sheila Fitzpatrick in the Soviet archives, right? So that's our core motive. We're not really national, we're international. We collect from multiple countries and we're looking for the interactions. The books that Svetlana and I did on 1989 contain German, Soviet, American, British, and French documents looking at the end of the Cold War in 1989, and Polish, and Czech, and Hungarian, because those people were driving the change, right? There was a vacuum between the superpowers in 1989, the great Bush pause with Gorbachev, and into that vacuum rushed the East Europeans, Solidarity first, but then others. Ending in December with the Romanians, who overthrew Ceausescu. One of my favorite moments, it really marks the end of the Cold War, is when the American ambassador to Moscow, Jack Matlock, December 1989, goes into the Soviet foreign ministry and says, there's all this violence in Bucharest, streets of Bucharest. You know, we won't consider it a violation of international law if you sent in Soviet troops to bring peace to Bucharest. Aboymov, who's the deputy foreign minister, says, well, you know, you guys just invaded Panama, and you're inviting us to invade Romania. No, I think we'll give you the Brezhnev Doctrine as a Christmas present. Great moments in the documents. That's the end of the Cold War, when the Americans invite the Soviets to invade Eastern Europe, and the Soviets turn them down, right? So this is the kind of revelatory material that you can dig up through Freedom of Information requests, and through these incredible publications, which is they're curated, so we don't publish everything we get. We go talk to experts like Nina, who helped educate Ronald Reagan on the Soviet Union in 1985 before he was going to go meet Gorbachev for the first time, right? And Jack Matlock and others. What are the important turning points? How do you look? We interrogate these documents. Who wrote them? Who was supposed to read them? Who classified them secret or top secret or more? Who saved them? Because most of what government creates doesn't even get saved. What was the point? Were they to cover somebody's rear end, or did they actually document a decision point, a turning point? So that interrogation, my one caution on interrogating the documents is don't waterboard them. It really does damage to the paper and everything else. So interrogation is a whole different thing. That's background on the archive. I appreciate any questions you have when we get to the end. Let me just talk about the schizophrenia in Washington today. On the one hand, you have the current administration releasing Central Intelligence Agency files with no redactions, covering a number of years in the late 50s and early 60s, with the names of agents, the amounts of money spent on the operations, who was responsible in Washington and what their arguments were, the operations in Mexico and Cuba and Chile and Central America that were remotely related to the John F. Kennedy assassination, but only because the CIA was tracking Oswald in Mexico. There was a theory that Castro had manipulated the assassination as a payback for all the attempts on his own life, et cetera, et cetera. So a review board in the 1990s, the decade of openness, I would say both in Moscow and in Washington and all over Eastern Europe. When Sheila was sending off her graduate students to explore whole new areas of the archives, yes, the security states were becoming more and more accessible to all of us. So you have this, on the one hand, extraordinary, even reckless openness, because a number of those CIA assets are still alive. There were American Social Security numbers of the staff of congressional committees also released, so almost reckless, but an extraordinary level of openness, which is going to be one of my calls to you, is that now is a time when you can study both in a single empire, the United States, in multiple empires, Soviet and elsewhere, the security apparatus. With these new revelations in the CIA, we're almost at the level of openness of the Ukrainian KGB files in Kyiv. I'm saying that with some sense of irony. I don't see anybody laughing except for Sheila. But the Baltics, the KGB files there, the Politburo files, the archives of Eastern Europe are full of Russian language documents about political and empire machinations that are incredible windows into how things actually worked. So that's on the one hand, the schizophrenia. You've got this amazing openness. On the other hand, you have the decimation of public data sets, websites being scrubbed. And on March 13th, Svetlana gave what was probably the last or second to last public presentation at an incredible institute called the Kennan Institute in Washington, which for 50, 60 years had led Soviet and Russian studies. It now doesn't exist. It's been wiped out. What happened? Well, on March 31st, she gives this presentation, and the presentation was about this document. It's an extraordinary document. It's a descent channel cable that she had just gotten in the last 6 months through a Freedom of Information lawsuit from Strobe Talbot's files from the 1990s. And it's a dissent written by the head of the political section of the US Embassy in March 1994 against all of US policy toward Russia, independent Russia, Yeltsin Russia. They said, you're doing it wrong politically because you're investing everything in your personal relationship with Boris Yeltsin. That's a mistake for America to do that. You're doing it wrong socially because all these new constructions that you're encouraging aren't going to fit in Russian society, which is this way. And your economics are the worst. This neoliberal market economics, he didn't use the word market Bolshevism, other scholars like Peter Reddaway have. But he says, it's going to drive Russia away from the West because you're breaking apart systems on which so many millions of people depended. He could not, his ambassador, a guy named Thomas Pickering, was willing to send it out in the front channel where it'd be read all across official Washington, Pentagon, CIA, State Department, et cetera. But the economics section at the United States Embassy refused to clear it. The quote that Wayne Mary gave, the author of this, was that they told him Larry Summers would have a heart attack if this was sent out. Larry Summers was then Undersecretary and later Secretary of the Treasury. So Svetlana appeared with Wayne Mary because Svetlana got this document Wayne had been turned down by the State Department trying to get a copy of his own cable. They said, no, we can't release dissent channel messages because it'll disincentivize anybody else to dissent. Svetlana got it because she went after Strobe Talbot's files, and Strobe had a copy of it in his files. So it got released as a piece of Strobe Talbot files. Wayne Mary couldn't see his own cable. When Svetlana wrote him and we went and had a drink with him in, what, November, December, he said, I thought I would die before I ever saw my cable again. We called it, Svetlana called it, the long telegram of the 90s because it bears comparison to George Kennan's telegram of the 40s. The prescience of the predictions and the analysis of what was happening in Russia right at that time. So you can go on our website and look up the long telegram of the 90s. Download your own copy. It really is 70 paragraphs long, and it's extraordinarily insightful. So after that great public session, there were people online, people in the room in the Kennan Institute, out in the hallway. We asked the leadership, so are you ready? I mean, Wilson Center and Kennan, you're on the list of globalist entities in Washington like Institute of Peace or Voice of America. They're going to be shut down. They said, oh no, we're ready for it. We know they're trying to, cut jobs, save money. So we've got a plan to cut 20 jobs here, 20 there, save about $4 or $5 million a year. We're ready for it. DOE shows up on March 31, and the next day, everyone is fired or resigned. There are 5 people left in the entire Wilson Center, 3 floors of the Reagan office building. And we had this vision at the National Security Archive. We worked together with the Wilson Center and Kennan Institute for years and years. We had helped gather those incredible documents. I mean, to give you one example, you can't get into the North Korean archives. So the study of North Korea is very hampered. To answer Sheila's question, what are the sources? Then ask your questions. Well, the Wilson Center projects, the Cold War International History Project, the History and Public Policy Program, studied North Korea by the side windows. All the communist countries of Eastern Europe had embassies in Pyongyang. They sent hundreds, thousands of reports back on society, culture, economics, politics, military, all the capacity. But they were in Hungarian or Czech or Polish or Russian or German, East German. But if you collected those and you're looking through the side windows, you've got the secret to what's the old story about the elephant. One person holds onto the tail and says, oh, it's kind of like a snake. Another one holds onto the ear and says, oh my gosh, it's a huge leaf. And another one feels the side, oh gosh, it's the size of a building, right? But if you have all the pieces of the elephant, you can put together the creature in some really interesting ways. So that's the kind of value of this stuff. Our vision was, they're shutting it down, they're going to close the lease, you're gone, they're gone. So a couple of former staff helped us get into the building, saying they were going to turn in their IDs or cell phones. Svetlana's research assistant, a real hero, Walker Gargagliano, who should probably be in this seminar next year, gathered a couple of his friends. He had just a new master's graduate at George Washington. Our webmaster rented a van. We had a lookout on the corner there. We had a lookout on the 6th floor. We had the van in the basement garage. And we ran a bucket brigade. And as we were going in, we had asked our friends who had worked there, so what do you think? How much is there in the archive? They said, oh, about 40 or so banker's boxes. Well, you know how big those are, right? Banker's boxes. Turned out it was about 165 banker's boxes. And we ran that bucket brigade all day and brought all that stuff back to the National Security Archive where we're busy scanning it. Because the only protection overall to this kind of decimation of public data is to not just save it and save it in one place, but widely distribute it. It's in the cloud. It's on computers in Iceland. It's outside the country if subpoenas come. So this is the yin and yang of Washington today, right? Incredible openness on the CIA and the shutting down of globalist institutions that have been key to all of our studies from then on. So I'd be happy to answer more questions about that, but I want to get on to actually using the Freedom of Information Act, and I want to give you this huge caution, because the problem we face with E.H. Carr's cuneiform tablets is that we now have on the order of, just as a result of National Security Archive lawsuits against every president from Reagan through the current president, we have compelled the government to save over a billion, I should say it like Carl Sagan used to say, billions and billions of e-records, right? No. The Reagan White House email tried to destroy their backup tapes. We got a court order and saved them. There were 250,000 individual email messages saved from the Reagan years. We had to continue the lawsuit, Bush Sr., 450,000 individual pieces of email, and this is just the White House. I mean, I'm not talking about the Defense Department or the state or much bigger entities, but so 450,000 from Bush Sr. Clinton, okay? World Wide Web's invented, Google gets a start, individual pieces of email, just White House staff, 32 million. Makes you wish for the cuneiform tablets, right? How are you going to possibly read all those? Well, W. Bush, invasion of Iraq, invasion of Afghanistan, 220 million individual pieces. I'm not talking about the multiple copies and the multiple streams. I'm talking about unique pieces of email, 220. And when we settled the lawsuit, the Obama people told us, oh, we'll do 220 million in the first year in the White House, because they had a president who used BlackBerry, et cetera, et cetera. So all of us, I think, as scholars and researchers and historians are going to have to bring to bear the algorithms, the search terms, the AI tools. I mean, most of the AI tools that we've experimented with on our declassified documents are terrible. They hallucinate like crazy. They mix up, you know, Pinochet and Duarte. And only when you bring them into a closed universe where the only feedback loop they're getting is from the body of records you're asking them to analyze, only then do they really become potentially useful. We're all going to have to learn to use them and to do that. We don't know yet how many instant messages we saved with our last lawsuit. We filed it in December of 2020, big article in the New Yorker by our historian friend Jill Lepore, warning bonfire in the Rose Garden coming. We knew in the first term President Trump was known to tear up records and leave them in the floor of the Oval Office, and so we were worried about mass destruction. Well, it turns out mass destruction wasn't the end of the issue. It was a U-Haul in the driveway carrying the boxes away with his souvenirs down to Mar-a-Lago, where they then showed up under the chandeliers in the bathrooms. And that's a whole nother story. But that lawsuit got the government to go save all the WhatsApp messages that Jared Kushner and all the other senior staff had begun to use. And think about the volume. Just pick up your own phone and think about your volume of individual text messages and begin to understand that that was the way they were negotiating everything from Ukraine, the Jeremiah Accords, the Abraham Accords, I mean. We're going to be faced with this enormous digital challenge going forward, and it's going to require all our creativity, especially on the authentication part of it, because digital records are easy to save, but they're easy to manipulate and they're easy to destroy. So part of what our motives have been over time, this will be I'll tell a story, but I gave testimony because the National Archives of the United States has been flatlined in budget terms for over 30 years. While their records that they're responsible for have exponentially, just think about those numbers of emails I just gave you, that line, exponentially increased. They've never asked for or gotten the extra resources that they need, and they're facing right now in the current government budget cuts, big cuts. They've already laid off all the probationary employees, and the backlogs on Freedom of Information requests for specific documents, say the documents of George W. Bush's conversations with President Putin. They officially informed us it'll be 12 years before we can begin to review those, right? So we've got a lawsuit. We'll break through the 12 years. We're trying to bring cases that will actually change those systemic barriers to access, I think, for all of us. So I think in the final analysis, I'd love to get your questions about sources, about resources, about freedom of information requests, and I'm hoping that's grandchildren intervening there.
It is, I'm sorry about
No,
that.
it's, look, if our grandkids called us, I think Svetlana and I would stop talking and say, you know, I mean, seriously.
Later.
Yeah, no, family values, remember family values? We're really into that. So let me just, I'll finish with one scene which Svetlana was witness to. I wasn't there, but it was in Havana, Cuba in 1992. And the National Security Archive had just won a lawsuit breaking loose the American records, the Kennedy tape records, the State Department cables on the Cuban Missile Crisis. And our lawyer, a wonderful woman named Cheryl Walter, presented them to Fidel Castro. Now this is 1992, so they were on microfiche. Anybody use microfiche? Remember microfiche? It's a lot better than the reels. I mean, microfilm is terrible, but fiche, at least, you know, one set of 100 images at a time, right? And so she makes this presentation. Here's the index. Here's 20,000 pages of declassified US government documents about your crisis. And Castro has this like that, and these big guys come out of the corner with banker boxes. Plops down on the table. He starts thumbing through. He says, oh yes, this is the letter Khrushchev sent me apologizing for pulling out the missiles over the radio rather than calling me first. Oh yes, he says, you're young, passionate revolutionary. You'll have to come visit me in Russia. The snow's falling on the birches. Castro's just like reading this. He says, oh, but this is a secret document. He says, oh, but this declassification, right? It must be part of the class struggle. And throws it on the table. So join the class struggle, help us get it all declassified, and we'll build more dissertations for everyone. All right, and I'd love to have your questions.